Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome back to another episode of Voice of Youth. So today itself, we have an episode that I'm sure many people wanted us to talk about for a while now, and we are finally getting to it. We are talking about the farmers' protests that are still happening at the time of recording this in India itself, and has been happening for a while now. I will quickly mention that we have, I at least, have been wanting to put this off for a little bit, just so we could properly plan this out, just so we could figure out a way to do this and do it properly in a way which, can help best inform people. That said itself, I will also be saying a few things and trying to ask questions to get different answers in this episode itself. So some things which I do say are not a personal reflection of my own opinions, but are things I'm simply saying to be the devil's advocate and get a discussion going with some of the youth itself. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started talking about the farmers' protest and also introducing our two guests. So let's go. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Okay, so as the two of you know, and we have been talking about this for the previous week at least, we are talking about the farmers' protest itself, and we have a lot to get through because this has been happening for a few months now. And I'm sure the both of you have been eager to talk about this. I've seen posts on social media. I've seen, a lot of things going on and about, regards to the youth itself around this topic. So how to start this thing off, or how I want to start this thing off, is by simply doing a Google search and seeing what's one of the first few things that come up. One of the first few things that does come up is Wikipedia. So most people would likely be getting their information from Wikipedia or just a general source like that, where they're not too sure about the information. And as much as we all know, you don't trust Wikipedia, sometimes we still just go to it. So the first thing the Wikipedia document website itself says is the 2020 to 2021 Indian Farmers Protest is an ongoing protest against 3 farm acts which were passed by the Parliament of India in September 2020. So it says the date itself has been from the 9th of August 2020 to the present. So 6 months and 5 days. That's how long these protests have been going on for. And I'd like to just start off. So itself, Gursehaj, you said that you'd like to go over the brief summary of the bills or the acts, as Wikipedia mentioned it, that have been passed. Do you mind just mentioning to us and just explaining to the audience out there that might not know, what exactly are the farmers protesting against?
So the 3 bills in question right now is, the first one is called the Farmers Produce Trade Commerce Promotion Facilitation Act. And this bill attempts to increase the sales channel available to farmers by allowing for private players to purchase directly from the farmers. So in a way, it's trying to end the mandi system that has been in place in states like Punjab, Haryana, Kerala, all over India for decades. Second bill in question is the Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement and Price Assurance and Farm Services Act. This creates a national framework for contract farming between a farmer and a buyer before the production or rearing of any farm produce. And the third bill is the Essential Commodities Act. So this removes a specific list of vegetables, and it allows the government to stockpile vegetables and fruits and other things for extraordinary circumstances.
So is that these bills go over the farmers' heads in a sense of them making a profit in their product itself? Is that what these bills are getting at?
Not exactly. So what happens right now is that there's an MSP. So MSP is the minimum support price. So it is a state calculated price floor. We could term it as a minimum wage or minimum price that a producer farmer gets. So what the government is trying to do is that it's trying to limit the MSP, and it's letting the corporations to jump into the farmer markets and buy directly from the farmers. So the government aims is that because the corporate players will do the bidding and they would buy the produce, that would increase competition, and it would at the end benefit the farmers. They would get higher prices. Okay. But it's not exactly the case if you see it in practice. Although a lot has to happen on the implementation of the program, but with the corruption and everything in place in India, it's highly unlikely that farmers going to benefit, because the corporation, they could just talk to each other, and they could just fix on the one particular price just to increase their profits.
Yeah, so they could fix on a price which obviously wouldn't be beneficial to the farmers, and that's why they're protesting. So that way these bills will, because they've already been gone through. They didn't actually, they just passed them. They didn't go through the normal legal system of, I don't know how the normal legal system would work, but they didn't go through the normal legal system in getting them passed. Government itself just passed the bill straight out. And Gurneet, so as we stated from that Wikipedia itself, 6 months that these farmers have been protesting for. What exactly? So they're protesting to get the bills revoked. And can you just tell us a bit about their journey itself? How they started? Where are they starting from? What's the protest itself looking like?
Well, if you don't need to go too far back into our history to realize that this isn't just a 2020 protest. If you go back to the Anandapur Sahib resolution that Sant Jarnail Singh Ji and a few others wrote up, that was written to be very beneficial for the agricultural sector, I don't know what the word is. And the bit that's highlighted right there, the state government shall have the authority to fix the price. And with the current bills that are in place, like Gursehaj said, the MSP was abolished. And with that abolishment, that makes the farmers extremely vulnerable to corporate exploitation. And the effects of that have already begun. Last year, December, a farmer from Bihar, and this year, 2021, a farmer from Uttar Pradesh, I think, traders offered, I think it was 1 rupee per kilogram to sell their crops at. And I think that's like equivalent to not even a cent in AUD. So, and you can obviously understand why the farmers are agitated. And long ago, back in the 1970s or the 1980s, when the Anandapur Sahib resolution was written, that was a request or a request for their rights to be given to them back then, that the farming sector be decentralized and left out from the state autonomy. And yeah, it's been going on since the 1970s, you could say.
Yeah, so the Anandapur Sahib resolution, it was never passed itself, was it?
No, the response that was given to that was 1984, essentially.
Right. Okay, so it's been something which has been brought up or at least tackled before in the past, and we've seen how that's gone. And now itself, the farmers are protesting against it. So they're marching from Punjab all the way to New Delhi.
I believe it's the protest started in Punjab right after the laws were passed in September. Yeah. So the protest started throughout villages and cities, but it accumulated strength and numbers after November and December.
And that's around when they reached in Delhi itself. So we have a few photos as well to showcase, some of the protests going on. So this itself is, as we know, they were police officers that were setting up barricades, doing everything they could. But we also see that the farmers, the protesters, those there were doing Langar di Seva as well, which is always great to see there. And it's interesting how, in a sense, interesting, because it's something you would expect from a Sikh itself, to still give Langar to those that are stopping them from reaching their destination itself. So why were they trying to reach Delhi for?
So what happened was that the farmer unions, they have been in contact with the government, and they are trying to negotiate a peaceful settlement about the whole the bills. But the government was not giving them enough time or enough ears and listening to their concern. The Modi government, it was so arrogant that they tried to ram through the bills through the parliament. Although I need to clarify here that all the things related to farming, agriculture sector, it doesn't come under the purview of the central government. It comes under the purview of the state governments. But still, central government still passed those laws, and the state governments and the farmer union, they were not happy. And because pro-business and anti-farmers in a way. So all the farmer unions in every state, they decided that because the government is not listening to our concern, we need to get unified and we need to march to Delhi. So we gotta sit on the borders of the Delhi so that we could have global highlights, global news coverage, and the government can start listening to our concerns.
So with that itself said, so it was a peaceful protest. It's the largest peaceful protest that's going on, and we can see in the two photos here. The one on the right itself became a very popular one, in a way to put it, of an officer attempting to hit the elderly Sikh protester itself. And on the left itself, we have them taking down a barricade. So one thing I want to ask, before I do that, sorry, these photos itself, don't know who exactly took them. I have put a reference to where I obtained them in the bottom of the PDF there itself. But that said, going on to what I wanted to ask itself, as we know, these are labeled peaceful protests. So at what point, them taking on the barricade like this, does that still make it a peaceful protest when they're ramming through barricades, as we'll get into later? They're tearing down barricades and trying to force them way to Delhi?
Well, if India is a so-called democracy and they promote secularism, everyone there should have the freedom to fight for their own rights, freedom to their speech. But the response that the central government gave them was putting barricades around the borders of Delhi, on borders, I don't know where else, I think Ghaziapur or something like that. And that was meant to prevent the farmers and anyone anti-nationalist, supposedly, to reach Delhi and fight for their rights. And that was meant to prevent it from becoming an international, being in international media. Obviously, that didn't really work out for them, because right now it's regarded as one of the biggest protests in all of humankind. So, yeah. Yeah,
so because... What earlier you said the word secularism was correct. What do you mean by that? What does that mean? Sorry.
So if a country is secular, that means that there's not one religion that has to be followed by the whole entire nation.
Right.
And India, that's, I think, in the very first sentence of the Constitution. I believe it's "We, India, the people, are sovereign, are a secular nation." But I think we've seen throughout the 6 months of the protests that it's anything but that. Anything but that. There's no freedom of speech. It's definitely not a democracy, and not in any way trying to tarnish the Hindu name at all. But there is evidence back in our history. There is literature that indicates that if you're Hindu, you do have some form of authoritarianism, I think that's the word, and superiority.
Are those in the government now? Are they of the Hindu religion?
Not all of them, but the political wing, BJP, RSS, they're all, I would say, that all stems from the Hindutva ideology, which is, the Hindu nationalism, pro-Hindu nationalism, you could say.
Let me put on another point. The secularism that Gurneet talked about, Indian government officially adopted secularism in their constitution in the 1970s. That was not even done at the time of the independence. India got independent in 1947. It was a majoritarian Hindu state. So 80% of the population still is Hindus, around 18% is Muslim, and 2% are Sikhs. So what this leads to is a majoritarian democracy. This is not an absolute or a real democracy. As we see in Australia or near other countries like US or UK, there's still a vast majority of population that are not from one religion or one sectarian group. So this creates a very divisive nature for the politics, because all the governments that are going to be elected to the central government or the states will be from the majority religion. So this gives them a big political necessity to cater to their base and not to listen to the minorities. So this is the problem that we are facing with the laws. If you go to social media, all the people who are anti laws are from the non-BJP states, and who are the pro laws are from the BJP states. So it's got to do a lot with the sectarian politics that's been in India since the beginning.
Yeah, just going off that, there was an article written called "The Political Knowledge of Ethnic Violence," and that was an article written in response to the Gujarat riots in 2002 against Muslims. And that article, I remember, mentioned something really interesting and specific, that violence in those times was more prevalent where the BJP influence was more prevalent, if that makes sense. So where BJP was more influential, that's where there was more violence. And back in those days, police officers were promoted, I think, and anyone who was sort of nefarious, they saw more promotion, where torture methods against non-Hindus was more severe, if that makes sense.
Right, so there's a clear divide both politically and racially in India itself, that it's continued all the way from 47 to in the 70s, I think you said, Gursehaj, when it was written, the secularism, and then 2002, did you just mention, Gurneet?
Yeah, so 2002 was when the current Prime Minister of India, Modi, he was sitting in the CM kursi in Gujarat, and there were anti-Muslim riots. And there's a website called Sanskriti Magazine, which is definitely, it's definitely got some type of Indian IT cell behind that, but that sort of does like a myth-buster thing, and everything seems to be pro-Hindu nationalist. And that website mentions that no, Hindus in fact were killed more, but that's not the case.
Right. So going off that, there's this one screenshot I've taken from an article from the 27th of January, actually, from the Times of India. I'm just going to put it up now. Might be a bit too small for people to read, but this talks about the Sikhs, the farmers' protest reaching the Red Fort itself, as we can see an image there itself. And it talks about how the final, I'm not 100% sure if it would be considered the final barricade, but one of the barricades there was broken through using a tractor. And as it quotes here, it says, "A dash to the heart of Delhi on speeding tractors that rammed barricades and even threatened to mow down policemen, widespread vandalism and destruction of public property, and prolonged clashes, with the cops." I'm just going to stop it there. So bringing up what I mentioned earlier about, these being peaceful protesters, you guys said that they've marched a long way, and everything that you've brought up now, is this one of the things that you would consider to be trying to twist the true nature? Is that, from your perspective, from what you've read, from what you've brought up already?
Yeah, they're talking about vandalism, the public property and other things. But as Gurneet mentioned, that it is a fundamental right of everyone to free protest. And when people from other states were trying to reach Delhi, the Indian government purposefully dug their own roads and put on barricades, concrete barricades, so that people cannot cross those areas. And that's like government hell-bent on destroying its own public property, so that people cannot protest. And when the Sikhs or the farmers, when they were trying to go to Delhi, they are exercising their fundamental right. And it's the government is hell-bent on suppressing dissent in the country. That's the main gist of the problem. Not the protesters, it's the government who is trying to create these divisions.
Yeah, I agree.
So then what about the fact that they used a tractor, though, to ram down the barricade? Did they potentially harming, officers that are there doing their job? Is that considered to be justified then?
Well, the public is then doing their job too, I would say, by trying to get, their rights, which they're being denied. And according to the Constitution, which the government tries to uphold so much, it isn't unlawful in any sense to protest at all. But in fact, imprisoning elderly people and abusing women in jail, that's unlawful. So I don't understand why our people are being criminalized for something that isn't written to be unlawful anywhere, yet the inhumane torture that our people are experiencing in prison, I feel like that, calls for a full-scale UN inquiry, and the government isn't looking into that. And if you think about it, in the past, police officers who've done that sort of thing, they get promoted, and there's a cycle, and I think it's about time that we start catching on to the patterns. Why are those inhumane people being promoted? Why are we being denied our rights? And then if you want to look really deeply into it, it does go beyond basic human rights and into the whole ethnical cleansing of minorities.
Okay, so in saying that, you've mentioned that the police have used violence, they've captured people. One of the things I'd like to bring up is that we have an article, I'll put it on screen real quick as well, of some of the journalists that were taken in prison and such for reporting on this itself. Do the two of you have anything about that you personally would have read up, or anything associated with that which you'd like to bring up? I know there's one example, I believe her name is Nodeep Kaur, I believe. Yeah, and she herself, did either of you know her story?
Okay, so I know that the only reason she was arrested was for covering the Kisan protest. And obviously she wasn't Godi media. It wasn't for the, Indian nationalism. And anyone or any journalist that they can get, that's just, what they're being paid to do type of thing. So I wouldn't say she did anything unlawful. But what's happening to her right now in prison, I think she's on bail now.
Yeah.
I believe that seriously calls for a full-scale inquiry. She's been sexually abused, tortured, and it's just ridiculous, the attempts the government has to go to silence us, and that's all in the name of democracy.
According to this article I have here from thehindu.com itself, published on February 9th, 2021, regarding Nodeep Kaur and its title and why she was arrested. Why was she arrested? Sorry. I'm just going to read this section out. I won't put it on screen real quick, but I'll just read it out. Miss Nodeep was arrested by the Sonipat police on January 12th on charges of attempt to murder, rioting, and assault to deter a public servant from discharge of his duty under the Indian Penal Code, among others. It continues on as well. But are you once again saying that this report itself of what she has done is incorrect and a lie according to what you believe?
Oh, absolutely. When you go back to 1984, there's a whole generation of apne missing because the police would get them involved in chute encounters, and they have no other basis of arresting people besides making up false encounters, getting them arrested, getting them murdered. So I don't know to what extent that's true, but I 100% would definitely go for the fact that it's a false case that they've arrested her on, and basically because she was covering, farmer protests from the right side.
Right. And then this would, in turn, do you believe, tie into the fact that they've also cut out internet services and other services around Delhi to cut off communication and to try to isolate the incident as much as possible?
So the one thing the Indian government can do right is control their media. That's the one thing that they know how to do. They have IT cells sitting in every corner of the world. I don't know, we've all probably come across countless messages from fake accounts, 0 followers, 0 anything. Or it's like they're programmed to be pro-Hindu nationalism and just label anyone who's against farmer bills as terrorists. And that's just another preventative method for it to get international attention. But Rihanna's tweet kind of proved otherwise.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that later itself. Gursehaj, is there anything you'd like to touch on to bring up regarding the protest journey itself, or what's currently happening? Anything of that sort?
I think you guys have covered the main points here, but I'd like to add that the cut off of media, internet access, and imprisoning the journalists. This is not a new attack in the government's belly. So government has been doing this from before 1984. During 1984, the whole state of Punjab was cut off from outside world. There was no internet access, there were no phone lines, there were no TV access or train lines going in. And they have done the same thing with Kashmir just 2 years back when they revoked the Article 370 there. So to this day, Kashmir, the state of Jammu and Kashmir, is cut off from outside world. There's no communication in and out. You cannot get the updates what's happening in Kashmir. And this is the same thing that government is trying to do with Delhi, but it's not, Delhi is not like Jammu and Kashmir. It's not separate from the outside world. Delhi is a national capital. And there are millions of people that stay there. It's very hard for government to stop that information flow of going out in the world. So government is trying its level best, but it's not doing its job, what it wants to do.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, on that note itself, what we're doing, we've been talking for quite a bit now. Well, there's still some things we want to talk to. Obviously, the Rihanna tweet is one thing we want to get into. And there's one other thing I'd like to bring up regarding this protest itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut off this episode here. We're going to wrap it up, and we'll do this in another two-part series, I should say. Sorry. So make sure you stay tuned. Like this video, comment down below your thoughts on the farmers' protest that's going on itself. Share this around because, so this is just some youth. We're showing you that we are trying to do our best to understand what's going on here, trying to do our best to make sure we talk about it and get it out there. Because one thing I will mention at the start of the next episode, I will also mention here, is that I don't see too many people talking about it. And I'll get into more specifics at the start of the next episode. So if you want to know what exactly I'm talking about, make sure you tune in for the next episode next week itself. And I'll just quickly wrap this up here. Thank you. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa. Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.